What happens when you get complacent? When you believe 30 years of experience is an unbreakable shield? Have you ever seen just 30 seconds reroute a veteran senator's career and turn a first-term representative into a political symbol? Ladies and gentlemen, look at the screen. The entire Senate Judiciary Committee hearing room is holding its breath. Every lens, every camera is locked on two opposing figures. On one side, Senator Lindsey Graham, a seasoned Republican who's treated Washington like home turf for nearly 3 decades. He leans back, eyes condescending, a confident half-smile on his face. On the other, Representative Jasmine Crockett, a fresh Democratic star in her first term, a standard-bearer for a generation that refuses to be talked down to on live television. And in the next 30 seconds, just 30, the quiet will rip open. Social media will ignite, and both their careers will pivot in opposite directions. Graham has just finished his attack. His thick Southern drawl drips with disdain as he dismisses Crockett's entire argument about the Voting Rights Act. A battle-tested senator believes he's just schooled a rookie. He has no idea he's about to become a cautionary tale for any politician who underestimates an opponent. This hearing was supposed to be routine. Review proposed amendments, read the briefs, go through the motions. Staffers whisper in the corners. Reporters wait it out. C-SPAN pans the room with its trademark cool detachment. Everyone assumes it's just another morning at the Capitol. Outside, Washington hums along as usual. No one knows that. In a moment, a single interruption, a steady gaze, and a folder snapping open will spark a generational collision. Old authority versus the age of preparation and receipts, live in front of millions. If you want this story to reach more people, please leave a like for Jasmine Crockett File. Thank you. Graham's mistake was thinking he could treat Crockett like every other witness who had sat in that chair. He assumed her youth meant inexperience. He assumed her passion meant she could be rattled. He assumed her background as a first-term representative meant she wouldn't have the political savvy to counter his attacks. Every single one of these assumptions would prove catastrophically wrong. What Graham failed to recognize was that Jasmine Crockett had spent years preparing for moments like this. Her experience as a civil rights attorney meant she had faced hostile questioning before, from judges who underestimated her and opposing counsel who tried to intimidate her. She had learned early in her career that preparation beats intimidation every single time, and she had come to this hearing more prepared than Graham could have possibly imagined. Senator Lindsey Graham has been a fixture in Washington since 2003. Before that, he served in the House of Representatives starting in 1995. Nearly 3 decades in Congress had given him a reputation as someone who knew how to work the room, control the narrative, and dominate hearings. His folksy Southern charm could quickly turn into biting sarcasm when he wanted to put someone in their place. That morning, Graham arrived at the hearing with his usual confidence. He had prepared his talking points, reviewed the witness list, and noticed the name Jasmine Crockett among those scheduled to testify. He had seen her viral moments online, heard colleagues mention her fiery speeches on the House floor, but he wasn't impressed. To him, she was just another young progressive making noise for the cameras. His morning routine had been typical: coffee with senior staffers, a quick review of recent polling numbers from South Carolina, and a strategy session about upcoming legislation. The hearing was just another item on a packed schedule. His team had prepared a briefing book, but Graham barely glanced at it. He knew how these hearings worked. He had sat through hundreds of them over his career. One more wouldn't be any different. What Graham didn't know was that his own record would become the weapon used against him. He hadn't considered that someone might have compiled his contradictory statements over the years, organized them chronologically, and prepared to deploy them at exactly the right moment. He was so confident in his position, so comfortable in his authority, that he never imagined he might need to defend himself. Graham had built his career on moments like this, on showing younger politicians their place, on reminding everyone in the room who had the real power. He had debated presidential candidates, grilled Supreme Court nominees, and faced down some of the toughest political opponents in modern history. A first-term House member from Texas didn't concern him in the slightest. Representative Jasmine Crockett came to Congress in 2023, but she was no political novice. Before winning her seat, she had served in the Texas House of Representatives, where she built a reputation as a fierce advocate for criminal justice reform and voting rights. A civil rights attorney by training, Crockett knew how to build an argument, dismantle opposition, and, most importantly, she knew how to think on her feet. At 33 years old, Crockett represented a new generation of black women in Congress who refused to be silenced or sidelined. She had already made headlines with her passionate floor speeches and her willingness to call out hypocrisy wherever she saw it. Her social media following had grown rapidly, with millions watching her clips go viral week after week. Her journey to Congress had been deliberate and strategic. After graduating from law school, she spent years building her practice, taking on cases that bigger firms wouldn't touch. She represented clients who had been denied their civil rights, fought against discriminatory policies, and won case after case by being better prepared than her opponents. That same discipline and preparation defined her approach to politics. In the weeks leading up to the hearing, Crockett's team did something unusual. They didn't just prepare her testimony about voting rights. They prepared her for Graham specifically. They knew he would likely try to diminish her, to treat her like a novice who didn't understand the complexities of Senate procedure. So they compiled a comprehensive file on Graham's political history, his voting record, his public statements, and his pattern of contradictions. One of Crockett's staffers spent hours combing through old interviews, C-SPAN footage, and news archives. They found the clips of Graham attacking Trump in 2016, then praising him in 2017. They documented his flip-flops on voting rights. They noted every time he had dismissed a younger politician or a person of color during hearings. The folder sitting in front of Crockett that morning contained receipts for nearly 30 years of political opportunism. But viral moments and passionate speeches were one thing. Facing down a Senate committee led by someone like Lindsey Graham was another challenge entirely. Her team prepared her thoroughly, reviewing potential lines of attack, studying Graham's hearing tactics, and gaming out various scenarios. What they couldn't have predicted was just how dismissive Graham would be, and how perfectly that would play into Crockett's hands. This hearing wasn't just about voting rights legislation. It had become a proxy war for larger battles consuming American politics. On one side stood those who believed voting access should be expanded and protected, that every eligible citizen should find it easy to cast a ballot. On the other side were those who emphasized election security and integrity, arguing that stricter measures were necessary to prevent fraud. But beyond policy, this confrontation represented something deeper. The old guard versus the new generation. Establishment politics versus social media savvy. Southern gentility versus unapologetic directness. The outcome of this hearing wouldn't change laws immediately, but it would shape narratives, influence voters, and potentially shift the balance of power in ongoing debates. For Crockett, this was her chance to prove she belonged at the highest levels of political debate. For Graham, it was supposed to be a routine opportunity to flex his institutional authority. Neither of them knew they were about to create one of the most watched political moments of the year. The hearing had been underway for nearly 2 hours when Crockett's turn came to speak. She had watched the proceedings carefully, taking notes as other witnesses testified and senators asked their questions. She noticed Graham's pattern, The way he would let witnesses speak just long enough to feel comfortable before cutting them off with a dismissive comment or a pointed question designed to rattle them. She watched him do it to the witness before her, an elderly civil rights activist who had been interrupted 3 times during her testimony. The activist handled it gracefully, but Crockett saw the frustration in her eyes. Graham's tactic was clear. Establish dominance early, keep witnesses off balance, and control the narrative. It was effective because most people weren't prepared for it. But Crockett had seen this playbook before. In courtrooms, opposing attorneys used the same tactics. They would interrupt, condescend, try to rattle her into making mistakes. She had learned to stay calm, to wait for her moment, and to strike with precision when the opportunity presented itself. This hearing would be no different. When Crockett began her testimony, she spoke clearly and forcefully about the importance of voting rights protections. She cited specific cases from her district in Texas where voters had faced unnecessary barriers. She referenced recent legislative changes that had made voting more difficult for working families, elderly citizens, and communities of color. Her testimony was thorough, well-researched, and delivered with conviction. She spoke about Maria Gonzalez, a 67-year-old grandmother from her district who had been turned away from her polling place because of a minor discrepancy in her voter registration. She described how James Washington, a military veteran, had waited in line for 4 hours to vote because his polling location had been moved without adequate notice. These weren't abstract policy discussions. They were real people with real stories, and Crockett made sure the committee understood that. Graham listened with growing impatience. About halfway through Crockett's testimony, he leaned forward and interrupted her mid-sentence. "Representative Crockett," Graham said, his voice dripping with condescension. "I appreciate your passion, I really do, but you're making this far more complicated than it needs to be." The room tensed. Other senators shifted in their seats. Crockett paused, her hand still resting on her prepared notes. She looked directly at Graham, her expression neutral, but her eyes sharp. Graham continued, warming to his theme. "You know, I've been doing this for a long time, a very long time, and I've seen a lot of young representatives come through here with big ideas and passionate speeches. But the reality is, you don't understand how things actually work in this body. You don't understand the complexities of election administration." Some Republicans on the committee nodded. A few Democrats looked uncomfortable. The C-SPAN cameras captured every moment. On social media, viewers were already starting to react, sensing that something significant was happening. Crockett remained calm. "Senator Graham, with respect, I believe I understand quite well. I've been an attorney specializing in civil rights law for years before coming to Congress. I've represented clients who were denied their right to vote. I've studied the legislative history extensively." Graham waved his hand dismissively. "That's all well and good. But this is the United States Senate. This is where the real work gets done. And frankly, Representative, your approach is exactly what's wrong with politics today. All emotion, no substance. All performance, no policy." That was the moment. That was when Graham crossed the line from tough questioning into outright mockery. His smirk widened as he looked around the room, gauging the reaction from his colleagues. He thought he had landed a devastating blow. He thought he had put this young upstart in her place. The Democratic senators looked angry but uncertain about how to intervene. The Republican senators seemed pleased with Graham's performance. The committee chairman glanced at the clock, perhaps hoping to move on to the next witness and avoid further conflict. But Crockett wasn't done, not even close. She straightened in her chair, and when she spoke again, her voice was steady, but carrying an edge that made everyone in the room pay attention. "Senator Graham," she began, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. "I find it interesting that you would lecture me about substance and policy, when you have spent the last several years proving you have neither." Graham's smirk faltered. The other senators leaned forward. On social media, the clip was already being clipped and shared. The tension in the room was electric. Crockett wasn't finished. She pulled a folder from her briefcase with deliberate precision. "Since you want to talk about understanding how things work, let me remind you of your own record." "Senator," Graham tried to interrupt. "Representative, I don't think." Crockett cut him off sharply. "You interrupted me multiple times during my testimony. I believe I'm entitled to respond to your characterization of my work, unless you'd like to explain to the American people why you can dish it out, but can't take it." The committee chairman shifted uncomfortably, but said nothing. Graham sat back in his chair, his face reddening slightly. He had lost control of the moment, and everyone in the room knew it. Crockett continued, her voice gaining strength. "You mentioned that you've been doing this for a long time. That's true. You've been in Congress for nearly 30 years, and in those 30 years, you've flipped on almost every major position you've ever held, depending on which way the political winds were blowing." She opened her folder, the blue cover distinctive against the wood grain of the witness table. Every senator in the room recognized what was happening. Crockett had come with documentation. This wasn't going to be an emotional outburst that Graham could dismiss. This was going to be surgical. She began reading. Each citation was documented, each flip-flop laid out with precision. The room watched in stunned silence as Crockett systematically dismantled Graham's credibility. In 2016, you said Donald Trump was a race-baiting, xenophobic, religious bigot. You said that if the Republican Party nominated him, it would destroy the party and it would deserve it. Those were your words, Senator. Your exact words. She paused, letting that sink in. Several senators shifted uncomfortably. The press gallery was completely silent, every reporter frantically taking notes. You called him a kook. You said he was unfit for office. You said that voting for him would be a mistake that America would regret. I have the transcripts here. Senator, if you'd like me to read them in full, multiple interviews where you explained in great detail why Donald Trump should never be president. Graham's face had gone from red to pale. He knew what was coming. Then, once he became president, you became one of his most loyal defenders. You played golf with him. You praised him at every opportunity. You defended his actions, no matter how contradictory they were to your previously stated principles. So when you talk to me about substance and policy, Senator, understand that I actually believe in the positions I advocate for. I don't change them based on political convenience. The Democratic senators were trying not to smile. Even some Republicans looked uncomfortable. The internet was exploding. Hashtags were trending within minutes. But Crockett wasn't done. You want to talk about voting rights? Let's talk about voting rights. In 2006, you voted to reauthorize the Voting Rights Act. You called it essential to American democracy. Then, after the Supreme Court gutted it in 2013, you refused to support efforts to restore it. When states immediately began implementing restrictive voting laws that disproportionately affected black and brown voters, you were silent. When I brought up specific examples in my testimony, you dismissed them as emotion over substance. She leaned forward, her eyes locked on Graham. So here's what I understand. Senator, I understand that you've been in Washington so long that you've forgotten what it means to actually stand for something. I understand that you've become so comfortable with power that you think you can dismiss anyone who challenges you. And I understand that you severely underestimated me. The silence in the room was deafening. Graham opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. He looked around for support from his colleagues, but they were avoiding eye contact. The moment had gotten away from him completely. Finally, Graham managed to speak. "Representative Crockett, I think you're being what? Senator Emotional Passionate." Not understanding how things work, Crockett's voice was sharp as a blade. "Or am I being exactly what you can't handle? A black woman who refuses to be talked down to, who came prepared with facts and receipts, who won't let you get away with your condescending nonsense." The committee room erupted, not in shouting or chaos, but in a wave of murmurs and reactions. Democratic senators were nodding in agreement. Some Republicans looked shocked. The press gallery was frantically typing on their laptops and phones. Graham tried one more time to regain control. "I think we should move on to the next." "We can move on whenever you're ready," Crockett said, her voice calm now, almost gentle. "But I want to make one thing perfectly clear to you and to everyone watching. When you try to diminish me, when you try to dismiss my work, when you try to mock my passion for justice, you're not just attacking me. You're attacking every young person who believes politics can be better. You're attacking every person of color who has been told they don't belong in these spaces. You're attacking every woman who has been talked over and talked down to by men who think their experience matters more than her expertise." She gathered her papers with deliberate care. "I came here to testify about voting rights because I believe every American deserves to have their voice heard in our democracy. You tried to silence mine. You failed, and that, Senator Graham, is what I understand about how things work." Crockett sat back in her chair. Graham said nothing. The chairman quickly called for a recess. As the senators filed out, Graham left without making eye contact with anyone. The viral moment was complete. Within minutes of the hearing recess, the internet exploded. The video clip of Crockett's response to Graham was being shared across every social platform. Twitter users created hashtags that immediately began trending worldwide. TikTok videos with millions of views appeared within hours. The mainstream media picked up the story before the hearing had even reconvened. In the Capitol hallways during the recess, staffers huddled around their phones, watching and rewatching the exchange. Democratic aides were practically euphoric, forwarding the clip to colleagues and constituents. Republican staffers were quieter, some defending Graham, others privately acknowledging that he had walked into a trap of his own making. Outside the committee room, reporters surrounded anyone who would talk to them. Democratic senators praised Crockett's performance. Republican senators either declined to comment or offered carefully worded statements about respecting all witnesses. Nobody wanted to defend Graham's approach too vigorously, not when the clip was already going viral. Back in her office, Crockett's staff was overwhelmed. Her phone was exploding with text messages of congratulations. Her social media mentions had increased tenfold in the space of 20 minutes. Campaign contribution notifications were flooding her email inbox. The moment had struck a chord that went far beyond the voting rights debate. Crockett destroys Graham trended #1 on Twitter for the entire afternoon and evening. The full exchange was viewed over 50 million times across various platforms within the first 24 hours. Political commentators from across the spectrum couldn't stop talking about it. Within the first hour alone, the clip had generated over 5 million impressions on Twitter. Users were creating reaction threads, breaking down every moment of the exchange frame by frame. Political science professors were using it as a real-time example in their classes. Communications experts were analyzing Crockett's technique, her timing, her delivery. Progressive accounts celebrated Crockett as a new champion. One viral tweet read, "This is what we need more of in Congress. People who won't back down, who come with receipts, who refuse to be intimidated by the old guard." Jasmine Crockett just became a superstar. Another popular post analyzed the exchange strategically. Crockett let Graham think he was winning. She let him get comfortable, let him reveal his condescension. Then she pulled out receipts he didn't know existed. That's not just courage. That's strategy. That's preparation meeting opportunity. But the reaction wasn't purely partisan. Some conservative commentators, while disagreeing with Crockett's politics, acknowledged the effectiveness of her response. One prominent Republican strategist tweeted, "You don't have to agree with her positions to recognize that Jasmine Crockett absolutely demolished Lindsey Graham today. He underestimated her and paid the price." Memes proliferated wildly. Side-by-side images of Graham's smirk before the exchange and his shocked expression after became instant classics. GIFs of Crockett's calm, measured delivery while dismantling Graham's credibility were shared millions of times. The moment had transcended politics and become pure viral gold. Cable news networks played the clip on loop. CNN brought in political analysts to dissect every moment of the exchange. MSNBC featured segments praising Crockett's performance. Even Fox News, while more critical of Crockett's politics, acknowledged that Graham had been outmaneuvered. The New York Times ran a piece titled, "How a Freshman Representative Schooled a Senate Veteran." The Washington Post analyzed the moment as a generational shift in Democratic politics. Politico examined Graham's history of political pivots and how Crockett had used that history against him. Political Talk shows devoted entire segments to the confrontation. Morning. Joe spent nearly 20 minutes discussing it. The View brought in political experts to analyze the implications. Late-night comedians used the clip in their monologues, with Stephen Colbert joking that Graham got read like a bedtime story. For the first 24 hours after the hearing, Lindsey Graham said nothing publicly. His social media accounts were uncharacteristically quiet. His office released a brief statement saying the senator stands by his questions and believes the hearing was productive. Nobody believed it. Republican colleagues were equally silent. Some privately admitted that Graham had badly miscalculated. Others suggested he should have known better than to underestimate someone who had built her reputation on courtroom advocacy. A few younger Republican staffers anonymously told reporters that moments like this were exactly why their party was struggling to connect with younger voters. When Graham finally addressed the incident 3 days later during a Fox News interview, he tried to downplay it. "I think Representative Crockett is a talented person," he said carefully. "We had a spirited exchange, which is what hearings are for. I don't think either of us said anything we regret." But his body language told a different story. He looked uncomfortable throughout the interview, deflecting questions about the exchange whenever possible. The confident swagger that had characterized his behavior during the hearing was nowhere to be seen. For Jasmine Crockett, the confrontation became a defining moment. Her social following exploded, gaining over 2 million new followers across platforms in a single week. Her fundraising numbers skyrocketed, with small-dollar donations pouring in from across the country. Progressive organizations began reaching out, wanting to partner with her on various initiatives. But Crockett was careful not to let the moment define her entire career. In interviews following the hearing, she consistently redirected attention back to the substance of the voting rights debate. "I didn't go to that hearing to have a viral moment," she told one reporter. "I went to advocate for my constituents and for Americans who are facing barriers to voting. If standing up to condescension becomes the story, that's fine. But the real story should be about protecting democracy." Her colleagues in the House took notice. Democratic leadership began inviting her to more high-profile committee assignments. She was asked to appear on Sunday morning political shows, where she demonstrated the same command of policy details that had impressed observers during the Graham exchange. Slowly but surely, she was establishing herself as more than just a viral sensation. She was becoming a serious political force. The confrontation sparked a larger conversation about generational change in American politics. Analysts began assessing what the moment represented: a younger generation refusing to defer to institutional authorities simply because of seniority, a more diverse Congress challenging traditional power structures, and a shift in how political battles are fought in the age of social media. Some veteran politicians took note and adjusted their approach when dealing with younger colleagues. Others doubled down, dismissing the exchange as a one-off moment that didn't represent any real shift in power dynamics. But the message was clear. Underestimating someone based on age, gender, or relative newness to Washington was a mistake that could go viral in minutes. The moment also highlighted the importance of preparation and authenticity in modern politics. Crockett didn't win the exchange through rehearsed zingers or carefully crafted sound bites. She won by being genuinely knowledgeable about the issues, by having done her homework on Graham's record, and by refusing to accept condescension as the price of entry into political debates. Months after the hearing, the exchange continued to resonate. Professors used it as a case study. Young people considering careers in politics cited it as inspiration. Democratic candidates in competitive races highlighted their support for representatives like Crockett, who weren't afraid to challenge establishment figures. For Graham, the moment became part of his legacy, though not in the way he would have hoped. In profiles about his long career, the Crockett exchange was inevitably mentioned as an example of how the political landscape had changed around him. Some supporters defended him, saying one viral moment shouldn't define decades of service. Others suggested it revealed deeper issues with how he approached his role and his constituents. For Crockett, the viral moment opened doors, but also created pressure. Every subsequent appearance was scrutinized, with observers wondering if she could maintain the same level of effectiveness. To her credit, she largely succeeded, combining the passion that had made her famous with the policy expertise that gave her credibility. She became a regular on cable news, a sought-after campaign surrogate, and a rising star within the Democratic Party. The Graham-Crockett confrontation offered several important lessons for anyone following politics or aspiring to enter public service. These insights went beyond the immediate drama and spoke to deeper truths about power, preparation, and persistence. Never underestimate your opponent based on superficial characteristics. Graham's dismissal of Crockett because of her relative youth and newness to Washington directly contributed to his embarrassment. Preparation matters more than experience. Crockett's thorough research into Graham's record gave her the ammunition she needed. All the institutional knowledge in the world couldn't protect Graham from his own documented contradictions. Authenticity resonates in the social media age. Crockett's response felt genuine because she wasn't performing for the cameras. She was defending her work and her constituents. That authenticity is what made the moment go viral. Know when to push back and how to do it effectively. Crockett didn't respond to Graham's initial condescension immediately. She waited for the right moment and then delivered a systematic, fact-based response that he couldn't dismiss as emotion or theatrics. One moment can change perceptions, but sustaining credibility requires consistent work. Crockett understood that the viral moment was an opportunity, not a destination. She used it to amplify her message, but didn't rest on it. When the dust finally settled, both Lindsey Graham and Jasmine Crockett went back to work, but not quite as the same figures who had walked into that hearing room. Graham kept his seat, his committee assignments, his daily rhythms on the Senate side of the Capitol. Yet something in the cadence changed. Colleagues and staff noticed it first. Fewer barbed asides, more careful pivots. A new caution when he interrupted a witness. The veteran who once treated hearings like home turf now seemed to treat each microphone as a mirror. Reflective, unforgiving, and always. Crockett, meanwhile, learned what it means when a single moment becomes a megaphone. Her inbox turned into a fire hose. Campaign committees asked her to headline dinners in states she'd never visited. Advocacy groups wanted her on their panels. Producers texted, called, and emailed for the first big sit-down. She added staff just to triage invitations. And yet, in interviews, she kept steering back to the point. This wasn't about a clapback. It was about the Voting Rights Act and the people whose ballots get pinched by technicalities and long lines. The bill itself remained what every bill is in a divided Congress, uncertain. But the argument around it shifted. Viewers who had never watched a committee hearing now knew the stakes. Voters who rarely called their member's office started doing exactly that. And inside the institution, a subtler change took hold. Junior members, especially women and people of color, began to press harder in hearings. They refused to yield when steamrolled, and they insisted that expertise wasn't a function of seniority. The old etiquette, defer, nod, move along, lost altitude. The confrontation also became shorthand in Washington for something larger. A reminder that the Capitol's power grid is not hardwired. Influence can still be rerouted, and not only by chairs and gavels. Preparation matters. Receipts matter. The ability to defend your case under pressure matters. The moment traveled back to Texas, where Crockett's town halls swelled from dozens to hundreds. Constituents who had never sent a letter to Washington found their voice. For many of them. The viral clip wasn't merely political theater. It was recognition. They saw someone who looked like their daughters, their students, their neighbors, calm, prepared, and unwilling to be diminished. On campuses, the exchange became a case study. Political science departments dissected the strategy. Communications classes rewound the timing. Student leaders borrowed the playbook. Collect facts. Wait for your moment. And deliver them without flinching. The clip jumped from phones to syllabi, from social feeds to lecture slides, a rare crossover from the churn of daily content to the slower current of civic education. To understand why the impact lodged so deeply, you have to place it in the narrative arc of Lindsey Graham's career. He's moved through Republican politics as both participant and weather vane. House prosecutor during the Clinton impeachment, Senate negotiator on immigration, Trump skeptic turned Trump ally. Each turn had a logic and a cost. Crockett didn't just list the contradictions. She framed them as a question of credibility. There's a difference between revising your view when the facts change and revising your view when the politics change. Voters can forgive the first. The second is harder to defend in the age of instant replay. Crockett, by contrast, presented consistency as strength, not stubbornness. Voting rights, criminal justice, economic dignity. Her positions didn't whipsaw with the news cycle. That steadiness translated, on camera, into moral authority. In the room that day, authenticity outran experience. The lesson wasn't that tenure doesn't matter. It was that tenure can't substitute for substance. You can hold a gavel and still lose the argument. The exchange also underscored how thoroughly political combat has migrated to the real-time arena. In a previous era, a sharp quip might land in the evening broadcast and fade by morning. Now, 30 seconds can outscale an hour on the Senate floor. Control of the narrative is no longer negotiated with a handful of reporters. It's contested with millions of viewers whose thumbs are the new assignment desk. Crockett is native to that terrain. Her instincts organize the record, anticipate the counter, deliver the line clean, fit the medium. Graham knows the terrain is shifting. He's still adjusting his footing on it. And yet, what people remember isn't simply who won. They remember the terms of engagement, respect, preparation, and the courage to hold a line when someone leans on you to yield. The clip cut across the usual binaries, left iata right, House iason Senate, and landed in a more human register. It asked whether power earns deference by title or by conduct. It answered with a demonstration rather than a slogan. Inside the Capitol, the room will reset, as it always does. The nameplates will be rearranged. Another witness will take the chair. Another senator will clear his throat and begin. But everyone who watched that video, on a commuter train, between meetings, after dinner, will recognize the choreography if it starts again. The dismissive wave, the well-timed pause, the folder opening like a hinge. They'll know what's coming, and they'll lean in anyway. For Graham, the legacy of that day will live in the footnotes of profiles and in the instincts of future hearings. A veteran learned, in public, that seniority is not insulation. For Crockett, the risk was different, the trap of becoming a single moment. She's worked to avoid it, turning the volume of attention into organizing power, trading viral wattage for policy traction. It's not glamorous work. But in politics, staying power belongs to those who can metabolize a moment into movement. The broader takeaway is less about two names and more about the wiring of modern democracy. Preparation can overcome experience. Authenticity can check institutional power. And a public, saturated with performance, can still recognize the ring of documented fact. That's not an argument for constant confrontation. It's a reminder that when confrontation comes, the side with the homework usually wins. Years from now, historians may not cite this exchange for the bill number it moved or the votes it changed. They'll cite it for what it revealed: a generational pivot in how authority is claimed, challenged, and sustained under the lights. The Senate floor can be your home turf, but virality doesn't honor home field advantage. It honors clarity, courage, and preparation. On that day, in that room, Jasmine Crockett brought all three. Share your thoughts below. I'd love to hear how this moment landed with you. If the story resonates, like, share, and subscribe to Jasmine Crockett File, and hit the bell so you don't miss the next episode. Check out the featured video on your screen. It's a story I'm especially proud of. Thank you for your support, and I'll see you next time.